you've coached so many teams to championships, and you've coached so many different generations and been around so many just different generations of players. How did your coaching evolve across the various generations and even your leadership beyond that? When when you look at almost by decade, how did things evolve for you to where you were when you last seriously worked, but even to where you are now?
Well, I think, Tom, what happened in my career wouldn't happen to a lot of people because as I got injured and wasn't going to play any higher hockey in junior hockey, because I wasn't going to be able to do what I was gonna thought I was going to do. I got very fortunate that I got into junior hockey when I was 22 years old as an assistant coach, and then I stayed in junior hockey from 1956 to 1966. So I was in junior hockey either as a coach for probably 7 of the 10 years, and I was a scout for 3 of the years, and so I had a really good book on all players. I didn't have a big book on Western Canada because I was in the Eastern Canada, but all the Eastern Canada players for 10 years that came up in the Quebec League, the junior, and the Quebec League wasn't in the Maritimes at that time, just the Quebec League and the Ontario League, and also the minor hockey because we were signing players in that decade. There was no entry draft. Well, one started in '63, but that was only for about 3 years. It wasn't a full draft. So all the good players, we were recruiting the kids when they were 14 years old. I mean, I can go back and people ask me what was the greatest player you ever saw, and it's hard to pick one. I mean, I saw Bobby Orr at 13. I saw Wayne Carlton. I thought this player was one of the best I ever saw at 14. Guys like that. But so I had a good book for 10 years. And then when I got a chance to go in the pros in '67, I knew all the juniors. I mean, and that's where the NHL, there was no European players at the time. There was no US players, so it was all Canadian, and that was when I got my good break. I got a good break to go to St. Louis under the late Lynn Patrick, and that I look back and when I wanted to know about players that were pro, like for the next 5 6 years, I remember them when they played junior, and that helped me a lot, you know.
Yeah, that's and I somehow I think that book still is still in use. I think if you're not holding on to one, it's in your mind. That's for sure.
Yeah, I like to watch. I always wanted to watch players that weren't in the NHL or in pro. I mean, until about a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe, I went to the all the development camps that the USA had. I got to know a lot of the young kids before they picked their team for the development program. So because I was living in the US during the summer months, but I didn't have as good a book on the Canadian kids because I was living in the US. But even when I left Montreal, when I decided that I had to make a career change, the three teams that I was talking to Washington, I was talking a little bit to Toronto, which didn't go very well. Punch wasn't there anymore. It was Harold Ballard was running it, and I didn't that didn't appeal to me at all. And of course, when you're in Montreal and it's Toronto, there was quite a rivalry. But Buffalo, the reason I came to Buffalo was I had a young family and it was close to the Canadian border. And I felt that if I came to Buffalo, I would be able to really keep up on the Canadian because we were even when I went to Buffalo in '79, the majority of the players were still coming. We didn't get a lot of Europeans. We weren't getting any Soviets or Czechs in those years because of communism. But I was able to keep a pretty good book. I was able to get to games in Ontario, and I always wanted to watch young players play. So I still enjoy watching young kids. You know, I haven't done it for a couple of years because I'm not with a team. I haven't been with a team since 22, so it's 5 years now. But I still like to watch young guys, and I got some grandkids now that they're not going to be pros, but I keep in touch with those guys, and I got some of them that play golf and some of them that play hockey, and I got about 5 girls that play hockey, 5 granddaughters. It's amazing. I'm sort of more into the I mean, because of there's 5 girls that play at different ages in different cities too, Boston and Chicago. I mean, I do spend time watching them on Live Barn, and I go to some tournaments. I go to if there's tournaments around the U.S. I go. I've seen them play every year at tournaments.
Yeah. Here's a question for you, Scotty. Since you talk about watching young players, and what is it? What did you see in a young player that maybe no one else did at the time, at least, or even a player, whatever. But what did you see in a young player that kind of made you go, pretty good?
Well, Tom, when I first started, there was a complete variation of skating, and it would be a lot different now. When you go and watch these games now, if you ask me to pick out the best skater, bunch of skaters, it's pretty well even. There's so many players that skate; they all skate so well. So when I first started to watch, and it's quite a bit of a story, but I lived in Ottawa. I was single, and I lived with a bunch of CFL football players. I was boarding at the time. I wasn't in the place very much because I was scouting, and that's when I went to see Bobby Orr play in Gananoque. He was 13 years old, and I actually went to see 2 other players that were playing in Gananoque. The way that the thing was, it was Gananoque against Parry Sound. Because of the population in Ontario in those days, it was a C because they weren't big cities, but it was so good hockey. And the 2 players from Gananoque never made pro, but I brought the man from the boarding house who was a football guy, and I said, "Do you want to come for a drive?" It was in March 1961, and I brought him to Gananoque. It was only an hour drive, and I'm at the game, and oh my goodness, Milt Schmidt was there, Lynn Patrick was there, Ren Blair was there. They had the owner of the Boston Bruins. I couldn't even. I was shocked, and it was to see Bobby Orr. He had just had his 13th birthday, and I told the gentleman, I said, I gave him the 2 numbers of the other players. I gave him number 8 and number 17. I remember the 2 numbers. I said, watch these 2 guys. Honestly, he was not a hockey guy at all. He was a football guy. And he turned to me after about 7 or 8, 10 minutes. He said, Scotty, that number 2, but he was 5'3". But the reason I was bringing it up, his skating, and he had the puck all the time. So I mean, it was just. I can still see Bobby. I could talk to him a lot about it, and he knows that I was at that game, but he was already on his way to Boston. He was 13 years old, so I would say in my day when I first started to watch the young players, the thing that would pop out right away would be skating. Now would be I look to see how they pro, process the game. So which would be hockey IQ. The positioning. Like if they're a defenseman, how do they play at the opposing blue line? How do they play on the gap? So I had different ways of looking at different players, but I would say now it'd be a lot different scouting because of the skating. I mean, I went to see this boy from Chicago, and I mean, the game was high pace, high pace. The goalies were pretty good in that game, but it was really helter skelter. It's hard, Tom. Now I even find in the NHL that when I do go to the games, even if I'm watching on TV, but I find that it's more chaos than when I first started because and we take out the red line. That was a big change, and the puck goes so far from one side to the other, and then when you see the puck, you usually see at least 4 to 6 guys right around it. And sometimes you can't, Tom, I keep saying the puck is so small most times, and my eyes are still pretty good, but most times you can't see the puck because there's too many people around it. But when we first started to scout, you could, the teams would start to play you see them coming up the ice slowly in their own end, the forwards and the defensemen following, but it's a totally different game. I don't know the scouts now. they get a lot of information though that we wouldn't get when we were scouting, you know.
What's the biggest look as a coach, Scotty, what is the biggest adjustment you think you had to make? And if you did, you probably led the world to doing it. But what was the one thing that you had to really adjust in order to stay current, to stay successful, to win? You know, do you recall a particular incident?
When I first started, I was an injured junior. I never had they asked me to coach a Parks team, and I did. And I went to watch teams practice because I had no idea how to run a practice, and so consequently, got ingrained in me that the practice sessions. So I really, I guess I would say I probably tried to concentrate what can I do different? What can I try? I mean, I tried a lot of things. A lot of them would work. A lot of them didn't work. I mean, I remember talking in the '76 Canada Cup team that I mentioned to you before we got on the air. I had a meeting I had a good meeting. I went with Fred Sherrill in 1973. We both went with the NHL's sponsorship. We were allowed. Russia was and the Canada and USA where you couldn't get over there unless you were invited. We both went to a hockey clinic, and I met Tarasov in '73, and so did Fred. And then in '76, I met him in Montreal, but he wasn't coaching anymore. And I had an hour meeting with him. I said I'd like to talk to him, but I can't speak Russian. But we got a good interpreter, and he watched. And that was our team that was just starting to really. That probably was the fall of '76, which I still think was the best team we ever had in Montreal. Even though we had really good teams before and after that, that's a team that only lost the 8 games. And he watched us practice. The Russians practiced before us, and oh my goodness, it was helter skelter. They had the two goalies in each net. They had a goalie in one corner and a goalie in the other end and the other corner. I met Tarasov, and he watched our practice, and he took notes, and he said, you know, you had 7 drills, and he said, I like maybe 2, maybe 3 at the most. The rest of them, you're too much standing around. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he showed me, he gave me some really good things. I tried them with Montreal, but we didn't really need to do them. And you know, one of them I got to mention to you because it's quite a story. But that was when we had the top defense I think in history of the league. We had Robinson, Savard, Lapointe, and we had another kid named Bill Nyrop who eventually was a really good defenseman, but left early. So, anyways, he looked at our practice, and he watched us coming out of our own end, and he watched a little bit of it. He said, "You're going to do some scrimmage?" I said, "Well, maybe at the end. I always do 10 or 15 minutes." So he said, "You know, I don't know. I'm watching." Lafleur was just starting. I mean, he was drafted in '71, so now he was in his prime in fifth year. He started the first 3 years. He was slow, and then he was now winning scoring titles. But he said, "You know, why do you leave him? Why do you want Lafleur to stay close? You've got defensemen that can really pass the puck." He said, "You know, you should have him do what we do. You should make Lafleur when he sees Robinson, Savard, or Lapointe when they're going to get to a loose puck and they got a little bit of time." He said, "You got to make sure he knows what he's doing. You got to tell him to start skating right by that left defenseman." And he's got to make sure that left defenseman knows he's coming by him and pull him out pass out of the blue line into the neutral zone. And then he said, have him cut across a little bit, and they can either hit him early or hit him late. But the thing is that other defenseman, and you know, you're playing teams like Boston had Brad Park, and they also had Bobby Orr at the time before he left to go to Chicago. But Bobby was on his last legs. But he said, if Lafleur is like our players, you're better off to play 4-on-4 in his own end because he probably gets mixed up. I said, well, no, he gets passes, but we had the red line too, you know. He said, yeah, but you're better off playing 4-on-4 in your end. And you know, Tom, that's when the Russians started to do the passing from one D into the other corner, and then the two wingers came and they circled. One went one way and one went the other. We never saw that in the NHL. We never wanted. We had rules that our forwards didn't leave the blue line until the puck left the blue line. And so, I enjoyed listening to him. I tried it with our team, but we didn't have to do that. But they didn't. Players didn't react to it. What are you trying to do? Not lose any games, So practice is getting back to what my answer is. I really concentrated on. I believed strongly that the way you practiced, the way you didn't practice, the way you rested was very important as a coach. That to me, that the most important parts of the games, and when you had a lot of good players, especially a lot that don't play as much as others, they look forward. Those role players look forward to practice sessions. And if you have good players, if you got excellent, top-notch players, and you have mediocre players, they're going to get better if they both practice at the right time and the right way.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure. And it's interesting how you say that, Scotty. I wonder if a child is of the ability to play up an age level. Would you consider that a good idea, or would you consider it to be better to stay where you are, and I don't want to say dominate, but have success, maybe be a leader, and just get even more confident?
Well, I still think it's like the exceptional player. The more competition that he gets is going to bring it out of him. And so like Wayne Gretzky leaving home, Patrick Kane left Buffalo when he was 14. And oddly enough, Tom, there's a gentleman where I live in Sarasota, Florida. He's in charge of it used to be called security. Now it's called something else because they don't have guns and they can't arrest people. So it's people that look after the gate and everything else. And one of them's from Argentina, and he's from the same hometown. And his name is Eduardo. I didn't even know his last name. And I got along pretty good with Eduardo. Same hometown as Messi. And he said, I have to tell you, he's like I don't follow soccer like he does, but he doesn't he doesn't like Ronaldo. I don't know, well, maybe because he's from the hometown of Messi, but he told me that when Messi, he went the first 2 years, he went to school in his hometown, a small little town, and he was so good in soccer that he went to an academy when he was 8 years old. It must have been like the hockey academies they have in Sweden, but it's a soccer academy. And he said when he was 8 years old, he played against 11-year-olds in soccer. And he said, and of course, all the way up, he always played at least 2 years ahead of his time, and 2 to 3 years even. So my answer would be, for an exception, it's the same as when they allowed the exceptional player in Canada to go and play junior. I think it's a good thing, but I don't think it's good for everybody. You'd have to. That's something, Tom. I don't like see kids leaving, because the one thing you don't want the best. If the best 3 or 4 leave from a group of 15, that's not going to help the other 11 or 12. Because you need competition. So that's a tough question, because individually, I would say if you play against better players, you're going to improve more. But I don't know if it's going to hurt the system. See, I think like the USA, now they've produced a lot of players, as you know, of late, because you've been in that business for a long time. And, picking the best 23 or 25 players for the 2-year program has really escalated a lot of those players. But you never know. There's so many other players around that didn't get that opportunity. So I think I heard some things now that may be going a bit by the wayside a little bit, Tom. They may not, they're at the stage in the U.S. that they may not want to just select 50 players and 25 in each group, and then forget about the other. Is that have you heard that too?
I have. I've heard rumblings of that, and I think the way it's worked extremely well for USA Hockey in terms of, they're under 18 programs or national, under 20 programs and whatnot, where they kind of hothouse,
Yeah,
2 teams,
a
basically
certain amount.
6 teams, and they're good. There's no question about that. I think Canada's approach has been, listen, there's 2,000 kids that are eligible to be a part of this program that are playing across the country now. With a good scouting network, we can see them all, and everybody gets a crack at it. It's ideology, in terms of its approach, both in Canada and the US, a little bit different, but,
But I heard the players are leaving now, Tom. The U.S. players were pretty secure that they had to stay 2 years. And Matthews only stayed one because he went to Switzerland. But
right, right.
now there's players that are not. It's not a program as good as it was 10 years ago for them. And maybe they don't need it now because they do have ice surfaces in places that they didn't have before, right?
I think you're right there, Scotty. I think they have access to more facilities now, and there's more opportunity. And I think too, and this is right in your wheelhouse, I actually believe, that the coaching has improved immensely, across the board. I think that the coaching is excellent. I think they're being taught the right things. I don't know about number of games played. Those are always open to debate. But I think the
What about Tom? What about the players? I wanted to ask you about this, and I know that if you don't do it, you're not. It's not. It's going to be tough to make it. But if some players like even Sidney Crosby, I got to know him pretty well, and he still believes that one thing that helped his career was the ability to play other sports, and now they don't play other sports. Like I know my grandson, I know like I know my grandson is 9 years old and he's a good little player and he's been pushed. His dad, he's got 3 daughters as well, so it's Bob, my son Bob, the youngest one. He doesn't want to go triple A. He said, I can't do it. I can afford it, but I got 3 other girls that play. So I'm not gonna go to the triple A team wants him to go, but they play in all kinds of tournaments and it's out of town. It's 5 hours there and there. So he also wants to play soccer. He likes another sport. Soccer plays around the same time as hockey. So he said, I'm going to let him play soccer in the fall, and the hockey season never ends. But he does. I don't play in the summer. But I was wondering, what do you thought about the kids now? I mean, they have to choose a sport, don't they, at a young age?
there's a point now where at 13 years of age, Scotty, if you haven't committed yourself to hockey, this is the prevailing sentiment, then it's too late. And the fact of the matter is, there's so much pressure on kids to make that choice at that age that, in minor sports in North America, there's 75% of the kids playing and hoping to play competitive and high performance hockey leave the sport. And
Oh,
that's sad. That's a sad commentary, but I will tell you,
what age would they leave at? 13, 14?
13, 14,
Okay.
that's when the pressure's on, to have this type of equipment, to make this type of team, to travel here, to go there, to specialize and go to a defenseman camp or go to a forward camp. And Scotty, like, to me anyway, if I want a player that can read the ice, and process, as you mentioned earlier, and understand certain situations and show good judgment, I want him to be a multi-sport athlete. I want her to be a multi-sport athlete so that when those things present themselves, I've had these other experiences that help me kind of, look at this, and equate what the right move is and do it. I think multi-sport athletics is critical. I think we specialize way too early and families
Mhm.
make a decision that they've got the next one. And if they don't, they just say, we're not doing this anymore. We're gonna do something else, which is a bit of a sad commentary because you want them participating in multiple sports like you and I did growing up, and I think that's where hockey sense presents itself. That's with the wherewithal of the pitch or the ice surface
Yeah.
or the court. demonstrates exactly how the player can process, what's going on in front of him. I'm a strong believer in that, and yeah, we're specializing way too early, and there's an awful lot of disappointed parents, and disappointed children that by
Yeah,
the time
children
they're
too.
13 or 14 decide to pack it in when sport can do so much for them. And yeah, it's an interesting debate and one that I think has demonstrated itself as being pretty important. I do have a question for you, Scotty, on you mentioned 3, well, actually 4 very, very good defensemen in Montreal, and by the way, since I was 4 years old, Montreal was my team, you need to know that.
Oh.
But
Oh.
how with a team like that, championship after championship, but how do you keep those great players and a team like that from getting too comfortable?
Well, it's not I mean, I think it wasn't so much what I did as much as the system had it just they wanted to play so badly at the time for that team, and they knew there was other players coming along that were pretty good players as well, and I think that kinda stimulated the competition for these guys knew they were good, but at the same time, they didn't wanna look behind their shoulders and wonder who's coming in to maybe challenge, but I tried to one thing I didn't do a lot of, I didn't do a lot of I try to let them they were so good in their skill level that I didn't try to change a lot of their skill. I tried to push the team element, and that was the thing that I if I said it once, I said it 100 times. I said, "We're not interested in individual trophies. If they come after the games, after the season and the playoffs, fine, but I don't wanna see players worrying about." And now it's awful hard right now because, there's so many individual trophies for so many, and there's so much conjecture. What is the Norris Trophy? What's the Hart Trophy? What's the MVP? The players have their own. They vote on their own, but that is important. I'm sure it's important in the negotiations of the players now that you see these players that they won the Hart Trophy or they won the Art Ross scoring and they won defense trophy, Norris, it's important. So I didn't try to really push them as far as I pushed the team element on them all the time. And, I never threatened them or anything. I don't think I did. I was tough on the conditioning. I wanted that's where the practices came in. I wanted to get a team. I wanted to get a team that had I used to the two things they're so simple. And I remember talking to a coach at a prospect camp last fall, and I never met him before. He assistant coach in Nashville, and he went to New York, Dan Muse. Then he went to Pittsburgh. He did a good job in Pittsburgh last year. He surprised everybody with what they did, and he was asking me, I said, "Well, what can you tell me that I could hang my hat on?" And I said, "Well, there's 2 things that I could tell you if you could get your team to do these. One is a lot different than when I started because we never had video review. But I said, I would continually stress in all practices when I had the blue line call, I never want to score a goal this year that has to be reviewed." So, what do you mean? I said, "Well, you know, I always told our players the player that controls the blue line to me is the player that has the puck. And he's got to be careful that he doesn't do something at the blue line different than most guys do, by waiting or doing another stick handle, but he controls the blue line. The other 2 guys that are probably pushing with him, they just have one job to do. Don't go offside." Now, I said in my day it was important because the linesmen were human, and they could it wasn't as a factor like it is now. Now if you score a goal and it's offside, it's not going to count because they're so good at the video review. I said, "That's important, Tom." Dan, I said, "The other one is I was a stickler, and I said, I don't know how he would do it now because there's 30 and 40-second shifts. You can't change on the fly because you have the puck or because you're putting it in a certain place. But I stressed to our players that you're going to make the decision to come to the bench. And it's going to be sometimes after a minute or a minute and 15 seconds. I don't want you to tell me that you can't give me the first 3 or 4 strides at an all-out pace. I know you have to slow down to get off the bench and off the ice to get onto the bench sometimes, but don't be lily-dallying and just keep working your team. I know you do it in scrimmaging and you don't scrimmage much, but I said I was a stickler that if you changed better than the other team over a 70, now it's 82, 84 games, you're going to have an edge that's going to be beneficial sometime during that season. I didn't want our players changing and just drifting to the ice, and especially now the players are they're short shifts. Don't tell me they can't give you 3 more strides to get off the ice. And I saw him, and he worked on it all year, and he told me that after he worked on it, the team did change better. And I felt good about him. I said, you're a good man if you can. It's not easy to do, but I was taught that before I started to coach junior. I used to go to Montreal practices, and Toe Blake would intentionally blow an offside with a close play, and then players would get upset. And I asked him once, I said, why that wasn't offside when you no, but he said, why do you my impression to the team was, why do you make it close enough that they might call it offside?
Yeah.
Just make sure you don't go offside.
Yeah.
But now, Tom, those little things like I see some teams are a lot better in changing. Some teams are better. I think over the course of the season, if you make the right moves, it doesn't show up one game, but it's going to show up in a season.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, and I wonder, with what you're talking about, this is maybe a little bit unique, but I know you can answer it. How do you feel about the reference to teams' culture? The environment that they come into, the culture that they live within as teammates, as a team. There's a lot of reference to culture nowadays, and is it a strong culture? Or is it one that's fractured? It's easy. Well, it's easy for my seats anyway to look at the Montreal Canadiens of your day and Pittsburgh and subsequent to that. But the culture seems to be a catchword now. And when you think back to your teams, were your cultures strong? And if they were, what was sort of what galvanized that group to be committed together?
I think it was important to know your team, know your players, how they operate within the team, and how they are as players and how they are as people. And I always had tried to get a core of 5 or 6 players that I could meet with, I could talk to, I could reason with, and I could have those players feel that there was naturally a captain and there was 2 assistants, but that wasn't enough. I had 3 other ones. I had 5 or 6 all the time, and I could give you just a story because it happened. And it's not always peaches and cream when you have to tell people certain things. But we had won 2 cups in a row, I think 76 and 77. And in those days, I didn't hound them in the summer. There was maybe 2 or 3 players that I tried to advise because they weren't the same as the other players about looking after themselves, and we didn't have the same conditioning we had today. And one player in particular wasn't taking care of himself, in my opinion. And we went to our training camp. He wasn't one of the top players, and he wasn't one of the lower end players. And right in the middle of the group, but he was an important player. And I said to myself, he's not doing his job in training camp. And we always had a good farm team, and Al McNeil ran our farm team for us, and we were so fortunate because we had good players to give him, but he developed them the same way. And we had one young player that led the American League in scoring, Pierre Mondu. Al won 3 times in the Calder Cup in that team. And Pierre Mondu led the team, led the league in scoring. He came to training camp. He was outstanding. We'd won the 2 cups, and we had 7 or 8 preseason games. He looked terrific. My other player, Yvon Lambert was his name. He was an important player on our team because he was an aggressive player. He could put the puck in the net, but he wasn't in the best shape that I wanted him. So we came to the opening game of the season, the 3rd year, and that's when they put the banner up, and that's when they presented the rings in the room before the game. And that morning, I had to make a decision. And I decided, I went in, I put the lineup on the board, and I didn't put his name on the board. And I put Mondu in that lineup. And sure enough, as soon as I put it on the board, about 10:30, we were skating at 11. About 10 minutes later, my group of 6 players came into my office with my assistant coach, Claude Ruel, and he was very friendly with a lot of the players, but he was a hang of a teacher. And he wasn't a coach. He didn't want to get involved with discipline or anything. And I told him what I was going to do. He said, "No, I don't think you should do that. It's the opening game." I said, "Well, I have to do it. I just believe in it." I said, "This other player deserves to play." So, anyways, I called them in. It was a tough meeting. The players were upset. They said, "You must play him." And I said, "No," I said to myself, and then they left in a hurry. They left. They were not happy. One of the most unfortunate times I was with them. And my guy said to me, "I think we could change." I said, "No, we're not changing." But I said, I have an idea, and I had read about it somewhere. And I went in the dressing room, and I said, now in front of the group, I said, "Look, we have a tough call here." And I said, I had to make a decision, and I said, it's unpopular. It's maybe not correct, but I made it, and I can't change it. But I said, I had an idea that I could present to you people, and here's what it is. We have 18 players that are suitable and ready to play, and I have 17 uniforms. If one of you can volunteer not to dress tonight, it'll take care of the problem. And you know what happened, Tom.
That's great.
And so my group of 6, I mean, they accepted it. It was more a joke at the end, but I mean, I had to do it because it was not easy to do, not easy to see. And as time went on, I went to Buffalo 3 years later, and a year after in Buffalo, they didn't protect Lambert, and I brought him to Buffalo. And I mean, and he performed for us like he could. By that time, he was getting on. But I think sometimes tough decisions are not easy to make.
That was one of my questions, and you've answered it. Is that what's the toughest decision a coach has to make? And
Lineup.
definitely, hey, Scotty, and your only currency is ice time.
That's it. You can't. I mean, you can help them or you can hurt them, and you can put them on the ice against the best players. You can. That's why I pushed a lot with a lot of the good players that I can help you be a good player, but I got to get you on the ice against certain players on the other team that are going to make you be great. I can't put you on against certain players. So let me figure it out when I'm going to put you on, and I'll give you the ice time that you need.
What do you think? I'm going to end with this one here, Scotty, and I hope I can do this again with you because I see this being episode 1.
Sure.
What do you think parents need to do to encourage their kids? This is tricky, to put down that handheld device, go outside and play. And if I'm framing it the wrong way, that's not your fault, it's mine. I'm just trying to figure out a way where from the parent to school to what we do with discretionary time with and for our kids.
I agree. I agree because one of my grandsons went to a camp this summer. It was 12, going to be 13 soon. He went to a camp. It was a fishing camp and everything, and some sports.
Yeah.
But the moment they got to the camp, I think there was about 35 at the camp. They had to give their phones to and the parents knew that the phones were available between 7 and 8 every night.
Yep.
If they had to make communication. But they if they went to the camp, you had to give your phone to the thing. And I still think it was a good idea. And they all went and they all gave their phones in, at least for the 5-day camp. It was Monday to Friday. And it's odd enough, that I think it's too much to ask them to not do it, because you get involved with it and they're going to do it.
That's right.
And it's like in school. The two boys that live there, they're good students, but I was happy. We always give them a nice gift if they do certain things.
Mhm.
But the school supervisor, I met him because he comes down to Florida for a vacation, and I showed him their reports, and he said, "Good, they got nice standings." But the one subject that he stressed, he said, "This is very important," and they both had good grades in it. Robotics. They have it on their one's in grade 5, the other was in grade 8. Robotics, Tom, is when you don't get any information and you have to figure it out. Did you ever know about that at school, robotics?
Not a chance I knew about that. That's very interesting.
He said robotics are the most important subject they can take, because nobody teaches them, nobody trains them. They have to figure it out for themselves. But anyways, on the subject of I think you just have to say at the right time, we have to, we're here to do something. We're here to practice. We're here to play. And let's make sure our phones go in the right place. And I think the parents would probably like it too, because they probably can't.
We all like a level of discipline, and that's for sure. I'm going to change and add 2 more questions. Do you remember your minor hockey coaches?
I do. I do. Yeah, I do know. I do remember the hockey coach. We had a great team. We won the provincial midget championship. 2 of the players made the NHL, which was quite a bit for Quebec in those days. I don't think I would have made it, but Don Marshall and Bucky Hollingworth. A coach was Tommy Burnett, and I remember him like it was yesterday. He knew nothing about hockey, and he just let us play. Tom, he got the job because in those days we didn't play many games, 15 games, 1947. I mean, we won the midget championship, and he didn't tell us anything. We had to play on our own. I do remember his name, Tom
That's
Burnett.
fantastic. So there's my next question to that question is, why do you remember them? And you just identified one of the whys, which is spot on, because play, fun, enjoyment, that's what it was all about. Should still be. And my next question is, and my last one, do you remember your elementary school teachers?
Yeah, I do. I had one favorite. She was a nice grade 3 teacher, Molly Udall, and oddly enough, she was a good-looking teacher too. I remember that. I would be 9 years old, and she married the vice principal of the high school I went to. So, I mean, that I do remember her. I do remember another teacher though. I got to tell you this story. Her name was Miss Ironsides. I finished grade 9. I had the misfortune, my sister was 1 year older than me. She was born with 2 club feet back in 1932, which she had casts on her legs for at least from 2 years old till 5. She never played sports, and my brother was a good football player. I had 2 brothers, but one was a football player. The other was a younger guy that went in to be a teacher, but my sister was a great student. She was always 1 or 2 all the way up, because all she did, we lived in a small flat. My dad made a place in the basement for her so she all she did from the time I remember, she read and read and read, but she ended up to be a school teacher. That's what she was. And she had a nice family later. She passed away about 5 years ago, but she was a wonderful student. and always in competition for 1 or 2. I was a fair student. I was a good student, but I didn't study, and I played sports. I played football, and I played hockey for the school in those years, and midget. So I'm following my sister, and the one day I couldn't stand in school was the first day of school. I don't want any of my sister's teachers. And sure enough, I get to grade 9 and I get Miss Ironsides. And oh my goodness. Well, Tom, I didn't do any homework. I got 80%, but my sister got 98. 98 or 99. I mean, she was always at the top. And Miss Ironsides got mad at me at Christmas, and she took out my sister's report card, and she took mine out, and she was giving it to me. And I was 79 or 80. I think 85 or something was honors, but my 80 was my criterion. And she showed me the report. You'd never be able to do this now. And she said, Scott, you'll never, at the present pace, you'll never even come close to your sister. I said, Miss Ironsides, I'm not even trying. I said, my sister, all she does is school. All she does is read books. All she does is do her homework. I don't have time for homework. I play football for the school. I play hockey. That's what I told her. I said, I can't reach my sister. I'm sorry, but and she didn't like it. I told my teacher, I said, I'm sorry, but I said, I'm happy to get 80.
Yeah.
And that was it. I know you. So that was my story.
Scotty, it's been great. I hope you know that how much I appreciate you taking time with me.
You're welcome.